We're going to be continuing on with our interval practice, focusing around measuring from this F note located on the 6th fret of the guitar and the B string. And we're going to be basically working within the Lydian mode. Let me give a quick recap as to why we're building the Lydian mode. I'll try to make it a little bit faster this time since we've seen the recap in the prior presentations in part 1 and part 2. But I want to get an idea of it, and remember the point here is that we want to try to cram in as much kind of theory stuff as possible that will be as applicable as possible, so that when I'm doing whatever I want to do for fun, whether that be playing with somebody else or just basically like kind of freestyling or whatnot, I have more flexibility. I know a little bit more about what I'm doing, so therefore I can move around a bit more. That's going to be the idea. Theory really helps to do that. So if I scroll up to the top, remember that we basically always are often going back to the major scale as our point of reference. And that's going to be like our Rosetta Stone, our key. But I want to use that to be able to move away from the major scale so that I can then do other things in other scales, such as the related modes, for example, or at least the most common related mode, which is the minor scale. That is the most common, but we can also do any of these other modes, and if we learn these modes, then we can learn how to build more complex chords while playing in the major or minor scale, and we can easily convert those other scales which use the same note and therefore are the same shape to related scales, like related major and minor scales. For example, the D Dorian can easily then be converted to the D minor. The E Phrygian can easily be converted to the E minor. The F Lydian can easily be converted to the F major. The G Mixolydian can be easily converted into a G major, and so on and so forth. So we're always kind of working on this particular shape, which is basically the C major scale, because it has no sharps and flats, therefore it's a little bit easier to work with. It's just the standard scale that most people kind of learn. But as we do that, we're looking at all the notes that are included in all of these other scales. And the guitar, even more so than the piano, is similar to a spreadsheet in that it's movable. So the ways that we can learn this is that we can learn it by shape. I can just learn that this shape, it has all the notes in the C major scale. That's great. I can also kind of combine that to my shape understanding in the caged system, which generally learns open position shapes, like a normal C chord, an E chord, an E minor chord, and so on, and then move those shapes up, those basically basic chord shapes up the guitar, and then I can add to the 3-note shapes the added 2 notes to get a pentatonic or 5-note scale, and the added 2 more notes to get to a 7-note scale. So that's one way that I can kind of name these shapes as I try to learn them up and down the fretboard. That's great, but it often leads us not knowing so much relative positions. I don't really need to learn the notes so much. I would like to memorize all the notes on the guitar. That would be great. But what I really want to be able to do is look at the relative positions and patterns within the guitar, because those relative positions will help me know, no matter what scale I'm in, how to build a chord from it. So that means there's a couple ways that we can do that. We can learn it by formula, whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. That's the formula we usually learn from the major scale. Or we can learn it from intervals, meaning we measure around a particular note. And that's what we're working on here, is the intervals. Intervals in particular make it a lot easier to basically build chords, because instead of just building, like if I want to build a chord, I could build a chord by just basically picking 3 notes that fit in this shape. And I could just pick them randomly, right? I could just say, I'm going to just do that. And that's cool. You've built something that fits in the scale, so it's going to sound okay in theory, right? So you could do that. You could just noodle around and pick 3 notes or pick more than 3 notes, as long as they're all in the scale shape, and it should be within the key and therefore sound good. But you're not going to know exactly what you're playing that way, because you don't really know what is actually being played in terms of chords, right? So if I actually want to build a song and think about what can I play in place of a normal C, if I had a normal C chord over here, what could I play in place of that? Well, it would be better if I can kind of think about it in terms of an interval structure around that C note, and then maybe I can add a seventh to it, or you can start to add a ninth to it or something like that. So what I'm not trying to learn here, I'm not trying to particularly learn all of the notes that are in the C major scale and a C major chord and a D chord. The notes in particular, that'd be cool if you can learn that, but I'd really want to learn the intervals. And I want to learn the intervals not only in terms of being able to repeat the intervals in my mind, but be able to see the interval shapes, because that allows me to move up and down. Then I don't have to play in just this key of C major, because I can move the entire position up the guitar. And even though I don't know, for example, if I was playing in D major, if I wanted a D major chord, I might not know the notes that are in a D major chord, but I know the shapes and the intervals, and therefore I can reconstruct it based on the shapes and the intervals, as long as I can find a D note on the guitar, right? And so that's going to be that's the general idea that we want to be thinking. So we're going to really emphasize kind of this shape, and as we do that, we will practice basically all of the intervals. And I want to practice all of the intervals from each shape, not just on the top two strings going down, but also on the bottom strings going up, because that helps us to practice inverse intervals, which is something people don't get accustomed to. And it also practices this shift in the fault line, remembering that this shift, the fact that there's a difference in tuning between these two strings, leads a lot of people to just simply give up on learning the shapes. They just learn the big shapes, like the full, like the bar chord shapes. But we start to not want to learn the interval shapes because they're not consistent across the entire guitar. But that's not, obviously that's not a good thing. We'd like to learn the shapes. All you have to do is remember that if you cross the fault line down here, the shape shifts. And once you get that, then you can kind of get the shapes. So that's basically what we're working on. So if I look at my Rosetta Stone of the C major, you'll recall that the intervals are going to be a 0 note away perfect first, a 2 note away major second, a 4 note away major third, a 5 note away perfect fourth, a 7 note away perfect fifth, 9 note away major sixth, 11 note away major seven. We're now going to be looking at the Lydian, remembering that as I look at the Lydian, I want to know that even if I don't play a lot of songs in Lydian. Why? Because even if I'm playing in the C major or any of these modes, I'm going to hit, like if I'm playing in any of these modes and I play off of these notes, like a D Dorian, an E Phrygian, an F Lydian, a G Mixolydian, an A minor or Aeolian, then I'm going to have an F in it. And when I get to that F, I want to know what I'm going to construct from a chord construction. In other words, do I build a major or minor chord from it? And beyond that, what would be the 7, 9, and 11, and 13 that would still fit in the key? That's what I want. That's what I want to know. And the only way I really could know that is to say, okay, that F has the related modal structure. I'm building a modal chord of not an F major. I'm building an F. If I was to build an F major, then I would go, like I would be still in the same thing for the 1, 3, 5, but the 7, 9, 11, and 13 might not be the same, or it wouldn't be in the same key. I could do that, but it wouldn't be in the same key. I'd be doing something different, I'd be switching keys, right, when I go to this chord. But if I play the Lydian, if I name that as a Lydian chord, then all of the intervals will be in the same key as whatever I'm playing in, which could be C major or A minor, most likely. So when I get to that F, I'm playing basically a Lydian chord. It's not just that I have to play in a Lydian mode, right? It's a Lydian chord. Why don't people do that? Because really when we build a chord, we usually only think about the 1, 3, 5, 3-note chords. But you could go beyond that, and that's when it gets messy, when I add the 7, 9, and 11, and a 13. So if I went to the 1, 3, 5, that would be the same 1, 3, 5, whether we had a Lydian chord, a Lydian scale, or a major scale, an Ionian scale, because it's the same 1, 3, 5, but it's not the same 7, 9, 11, and 13. So that's why if you want to build more complex chords, you still need to know that you would like to label these not just simply as relative positions, helping me determine if I have a major or minor chord, but rather I'm going to label each of these by the mode, giving me the ability to know all of the intervals, building more complex chords, even if I'm not playing in that particular scale. How do we do that? Well, I'm going to label all of the modes using an absolute numbering system that's going to be related to the major scale. That means the Lydian is the fourth. It's going to be the fourth position related to the major scale. So I'm going to give it an absolute numbering position of a 4. So when I go down to Lydian, if I go down to Lydian, what happened is we made the F the first, relative position 1. So now it's relative position 1, but I'm still going to call it the fourth mode as I compare it to my Rosetta Stone, which is the major scale. And by being able to do that, that automatically tells me that it must be a major mode. I must be able to build a major scale from it, because the 1, 4, 5 of the majors is where I build the major scale. And then every other position, I would like to be able to name it with the absolute numbering system related to the major scale, because that allows me to know whether I build a major or minor chord. So if I go to the 2 of the Lydian, then what is that? Well, the Lydian is basically starting on the 5th related to the major scale. So the 2 of the Lydian, the second position of the Lydian, is what I would call mode number 5, or the modal chord number 5, which is the Mixolydian mode. See, if I know that, then I know that the Mixolydian mode has a major chord construction, and I know that the 7th, it has a flat 7th in it. The 3rd of the Lydian is going to be equivalent to what I would call the modal chord that I would construct of mode number 6, which is the Aeolian. How could I get there easily? I can easily get there by saying, well, I'm on the Lydian. The Lydian was mode number 4, and then if I go up 3, it's going to be 4, 5, right? So now I'm going to go up two more notes. So I can take the relative position, which is the 3rd related to the Lydian, minus 1 gives me 2, plus the mode that I started on, which was mode number 4. 4 plus 2, it gives me 6. Mode number 6 is Aeolian. Now, I know that's a lot of thinking kind of to go through it, but again, if once you start to play with that, your mind will start to pick that up easily, which allows you to move away from the shortcut conventions, which gets you stuck in a major scale. You're stuck in a major scale or a minor scale because we've just simply remembered what the relative positions are to make a major chord and minor chord in those scales. Therefore, I can't easily go to a Lydian or to a Mixolydian because I don't know the chord constructions, even if I know the actual notes in the chord, because the notes are the same, right? So anyway, that's the general idea. All right, so now we're on the 7th. I'm sorry, the 5th. So we're working on the 5th.